$300. That is the entire distance between a human being sleeping on frozen pavement tonight and a human being sleeping inside a locked, insulated shell that was engineered to survive 20 years of direct sunlight without cracking. In a church parking lot in the American Midwest, a 58-year-old woman is asleep in a real bed inside what used to be a rainwater storage tank. The kind of huge green plastic tank you have driven past on 1,000 farms without ever once looking at it. And when the rain starts at 3 in the morning, she does not wake up cold. She wakes up for a moment, listens to the drops drumming softly on the curved roof above her, and goes back to sleep. Residents say that sound is the strangest and best part of living in a tank, and it is only the beginning because what it is actually like inside one of these things, the surprisingly good parts and the parts nobody making feel-good news segments will tell you, is a much stranger story than the price tag suggests. To understand how a water tank becomes a bedroom, you first have to understand what a water tank actually is, because almost nobody does. The tanks being converted are not metal drums, and they are not flimsy garden barrels. They are rotomolded polyethylene storage tanks, the workhorses of American agriculture, usually in the 2,500-gallon range, which makes them roughly 8 feet across and roughly 8 feet tall. Ranchers use them to water cattle. Fire departments stage them in wildfire country. Rural families drink out of them their whole lives. Each one is molded as a single, seamless piece of food-grade plastic with ultraviolet inhibitors baked into the material, because a tank that sits in a hayfield has to shrug off the sun for decades. And here is the detail that changes everything. When that tank is full, the plastic shell is quietly holding back about 10 tons of water, pressing outward on every square inch. An object built for that job does not care about wind, rain, snow load, or a person leaning against the wall. It was over-engineered on the day it left the factory, and it stays over-engineered forever. But if these tanks are so valuable, why would anyone give one away? Because the factories that make them produce a steady stream of orphans. A tank comes out of the mold with a cosmetic blemish, a discolored streak, a wall a few millimeters thin in one spot, and it can no longer be certified to hold drinking water. Distributors get stuck with canceled orders. Farm supply yards end up with returns that took a forklift dent. These factory seconds pile up behind warehouses in Texas, Iowa, and Georgia, too flawed to sell at full price and too bulky to store, and manufacturers will sometimes sell them for scrap value or donate them outright just to clear the yard. Which means that scattered across rural America right now are thousands of watertight, sunproof, one-piece rooms that their own makers consider garbage. And the idea of sleeping inside a water vessel is older than it sounds. Back in 1977, a family named the Lundbergs rebuilt a derelict 25,000-gallon redwood water tank on the Big Island of Hawaii into a round family home, raised 2 children in it, and stayed snug and dry through storms that flattened lesser buildings. Mother Earth News wrote it up with genuine admiration, and the lesson sat quietly in the archives for decades. A tank is just a room that has not been invited inside yet. Then, in the last few years, that old lesson collided with the worst homelessness numbers America has ever recorded. The 2024 federal count documented 771,480 people without a home on a single night, an 18% jump in 1 year and the highest figure since the government began tracking it. And in scattered towns, the same kinds of people who had already been bolting together dome shelters and pallet cabins, the church crews, the veterans posts, the retiree clubs with a trailer and a tool bag, looked at those green plastic tanks behind the farm supply store and asked the obvious question: if this thing can protect 2,500 gallons of drinking water from the Texas sun for 20 years, why can it not protect one sleeping grandmother from one Ohio winter? So what does it take to turn a tank into a home? Watching a volunteer conversion day is almost anticlimactic because the hard part, the shell itself, arrived finished from the factory years ago. The morning starts with a flatbed truck, a donated tank strapped down like a giant pickle, and a crowd of people in work gloves in a gravel lot. The first cut is the one everybody gathers around to watch. A retired contractor draws a door-shaped outline on the curved wall in marker, drills a starter hole, and runs a jigsaw through plastic that cuts easier than plywood. The slab that falls away becomes the door itself, rehung on hinges with weather stripping and a real deadbolt. By late morning, volunteers are inside on their knees screwing down a raised, insulated wooden floor so nobody sleeps against cold plastic on cold ground. 2 small vents go in high on the wall, and that little detail will end up mattering more than almost anything else in this story, for reasons you will see in a minute. Then comes a bed, a battery-powered light, a smoke detector, a hook by the door, and a coat of light-colored exterior paint to bounce the sun. Total cash outlay when the tank itself is donated runs right around $300, which is less than one night in an American emergency room. By evening, somebody's grandmother has hung a curtain inside the doorway. A church member has zip-tied a mailbox number to the fence post, and a structure the manufacturer wrote off as scrap is a house with an address. But the build day is the easy part to film. The real story is the first night, because sleeping inside a plastic tank is genuinely unlike sleeping anywhere else, and residents describe 3 things over and over. The first is the sound, the one that woman in the church parking lot fell back asleep to. A polyethylene wall is nothing like the concrete of Hong Kong's famous pipe homes, which swallow the world in silence. Plastic is a drum skin. When rain hits the rounded roof of a tank, the whole shell comes alive with a deep, soft patter that residents compare to sleeping inside an enormous heartbeat. People who spent years under overpasses listening for footsteps say the rain sound is the first thing that ever put them to sleep instead of keeping them awake. Wind is stranger. A hard gust does not rattle a tank the way it rattles a shed, because there are no flat panels to catch it, but the shell hums, a low round note like a finger circling a wine glass. More than one resident has said they now sleep badly on calm nights because the quiet feels like the tank holding its breath. The second thing is the heat, and this is where the tank shows its temper. Dark plastic in July sunshine is a greenhouse, and an unshaded, unvented tank can climb to dangerous temperatures by early afternoon. Those 2 little vents and that pale coat of paint are survival equipment, plain and simple, and organized sites park their tanks under trees, under carport shades, or on the north side of a building for the same reason. Winter flips the problem. A sleeping human breathes out a surprising amount of moisture, and on a freezing night that moisture finds the cold, curved ceiling and condenses, so residents learn a nightly ritual. Crack the vent before bed, even when it is bitter outside, or wake at dawn to your own breath raining back down on the blankets. The insulated floor does the heaviest lifting, because the ground is the great heat thief, and a body separated from the earth by framing and foam board can keep itself warm inside a small, sealed space in ways that shock people who spent winters in tents. And the third thing is the shape. There is not one flat wall or square corner anywhere inside a tank. A dresser will not sit against a wall that curves away from it. A framed photograph of grandchildren has to hang from a strap over the ceiling lip because tape and nails have nothing honest to grip. The floor plan is a circle about 7 feet across, roughly 40 square feet of usable floor, and full standing height exists only in the middle, a fact every new resident discovers the first time they stand up too fast near the wall. But several longtime residents defend the curve fiercely. A round room has no dark corner for anything to hide in, they say. And when the light comes through the vent at sunrise, it washes the whole wall at once, like being inside a lantern. Life outside the shell is where the romance ends, and it would be dishonest to skip it. A converted tank has no bathroom, no running water, and no kitchen, full stop. At the organized sites run by churches and nonprofits, that means a walk across the lot to a shared bathroom trailer at 2 in the morning in the rain, in a coat over pajamas. At the informal camps, it can mean buckets, distant gas stations, and all the health problems that follow when sanitation fails. Drinking water arrives in hauled jugs, and there is bleak irony in carrying water bottles into a vessel built to hold 2,500 gallons of it. Refrigeration does not exist. Meals lean hard on cans and crackers, and cooking happens outside on a camp stove, always outside, always with one eye on the flame, for a reason the critics of these tanks are about to make very clear. And yet, when caseworkers describe what actually changes for a person who moves from the sidewalk into a tank, they never lead with the plastic. They describe 3 small repairs. The first is the rain itself. For someone who has spent years outside, weather is an emergency, something you brace against and lose sleep over. Inside the shell, for the first time in years, weather turns back into what it is for the rest of us, a sound on the roof. Caseworkers say you can watch that change in a person's face within a month. The second is the mailbox. That number zip-tied to the fence post is not decoration. Without an address, you cannot be hired, open a bank account, or receive a benefits letter, and a cot in a crowded shelter does not qualify. A numbered unit on a registered lot does, and residents describe the first piece of mail with their own name on it, the way other people describe a diploma. And the third repair happens every single night, in the dark, in half a second. It is the sound of the deadbolt turning from the inside. One resident put it this way: "Out there, every door I ever saw was locked against me. Now I own the lock." Something else grows up around the tanks that nobody plans for, and that is a neighborhood. At the organized sites, a full day has a rhythm that surprises newcomers. Mornings start when the shared kitchen opens and coffee brews for anyone who wants it. Residents with jobs catch the bus at the corner. Residents without them work the site itself, sweeping the gravel paths, touching up paint on the tanks, tending the raised vegetable beds that seem to appear within a month of any group of people over 60 settling anywhere. An older resident who has survived 3 winters teaches a newcomer the vent ritual, so their blankets stay dry. Somebody with a jigsaw helps the next conversion go faster than the last one. Women organize shared cooking schedules that keep everyone fed when one person's food stamps run short, and veterans quietly watch each other's doors during the day because theft never fully disappears from any camp, and everyone knows it. Evenings bring folding tables, dominoes, and the smell of communal dinner. And by 10, most of the tanks have gone dark, sitting in rows under the lot lights like a strange crop that came up overnight. Residents who came out of the county shelter system say the difference is hard to explain to anyone who has not lived both. A tank village expects you to build one. Several residents have said that expectation was the first thing in years that treated them like a grown adult. And a small number have also admitted it was the hardest part, harder than the street some weeks, because the street never once asked them to show up for anybody. Now, before we get to the loudest arguments against these tanks, I want to pause for the people watching who are not just curious about this story. Some of you are one missed check away from the inside of it. Some of you have a brother, a daughter, or a neighbor sleeping in a car tonight, and you do not know how to help. And a heartbreaking number of the people who end up outside in this country served it in uniform first. On any given night, more than 30,000 American veterans sleep without a home. That is why we put together a guide called The Veteran's Blueprint. It walks through the emergency housing programs, benefits, and lesser-known assistance strategies that can keep a struggling veteran, or honestly anyone standing close to the edge, off the street entirely. These programs are scattered across a dozen different agencies with a dozen different application systems, and most people never find the ones they actually qualify for, so we gathered them into one place, in plain language, in the order you would actually use them. You will find the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. If you are struggling, it may change your next 6 months. If you are watching for someone else, it will show you exactly where to start helping them. While guides like that fight the crisis one household at a time, the picture of who actually ends up inside these tanks has been changing under everyone's feet. The fastest growing group of homeless Americans is not troubled young men. It is people over 55. Social workers call it the gray wave, and site operators see it in the intake paperwork every week. A retired home health aide whose landlord sold the building out from under a 19-year tenancy. A widow whose Social Security check covers the storage unit where her furniture waits, but not an apartment to put it in. A drywall finisher whose shoulders quit at 61, 4 years short of the pension. Many of them tried exactly one night in a conventional emergency shelter, and after a lifetime of quiet rooms and locked doors, the noise and the chaos sent them straight back to the car. A small locked shelter in a fenced lot, beside neighbors their own age, is frequently the only offer of help this generation will actually say yes to. And operators say these older residents change every site they join because they show up already knowing how to sweep a shared path, return a borrowed tool, and check on the neighbor whose light did not come on. That said, the criticism of the tanks is loud, and some of it deserves to be. Opponents barely need a sentence. We are housing human beings in agricultural equipment. Fire safety experts point out the hardest truth in this whole story, which is that polyethylene burns, and unlike concrete, a plastic shell near an open flame or a knocked-over heater is a genuine hazard. This is why the responsible programs ban indoor cooking absolutely, install smoke detectors in every unit, and space the tanks apart like the fire code was written by someone who meant it. Building inspectors note, correctly, that a converted tank violates residential codes in every city in America. Design psychologists warn that 40 square feet leaves very little room for a bad day. Neighborhood groups fight the sites in council meetings over property values. And after the Supreme Court's 2024 Grants Pass ruling made it legal for cities to fine and jail people simply for sleeping outside, critics argue the deeper danger is political. That every cheap tank hands a city one more excuse to criminalize the sidewalk while never building the real apartments it owes its people. The people converting tanks do not really dispute any of that. They dispute the timeline underneath it. A person sleeping outside in America dies decades earlier than the rest of us, from exposure, untreated illness, and violence. And studies keep finding that leaving one person on the sidewalk quietly costs the public tens of thousands of dollars a year in emergency rooms, ambulances, and jail nights. Meanwhile, the average affordable housing project in a major American city takes about half a decade from approval to keys, and the woman in the church parking lot is 58 now. The volunteers with the jigsaw are not arguing that a plastic tank is the answer to the housing crisis. They are arguing that she does not have half a decade to wait for the answer, and that on the coldest night of this coming winter, the distance between policy and a person is exactly one deadbolt. So think back to that woman asleep while the rain drums on the curve above her head. There is something almost poetic hiding in what that green shell was originally built to do. Every water tank ever molded had exactly one job: to hold something precious, to keep it safe from the sun, the cold, and everything outside that wanted in, and to do that job without failing for decades. Nobody at the factory ever imagined the precious thing inside would one day be a 58-year-old woman with her own mailbox number and her own lock. The plastic does not know the difference. It just keeps doing its job. The link to the Veteran's Blueprint stays in the description for anyone who needs it or knows someone who does. And if you want more true stories about the hidden ways ordinary people are solving impossible problems, hit subscribe, because next week we are climbing inside the abandoned grain silos being converted into apartments across the American Midwest, and what the first families discovered about living inside a 90-foot steel tube genuinely surprised us. We will see you there.